Good morning. As you know, our topics for this week were really on the heavier side. So rather than focusing on the evolutionary basis of rape itself, I thought I would focus on the evolutionary basis of the adaptations that women have had to counter the problem of rape. So the article I'll be presenting today is called "The Effects of a Sexual Assault Scenario on Hand Grip Strength Across the Menstrual Cycle." So pregnancy caused by rape is one of the most evolutionary problematic occurrences that can happen as a result of rape. And this has four main problems that can occur as problems related to pregnancy. So first, rape eliminates the possibility of mate choice. By forcing himself upon a woman, a man is eliminating a woman's ability to choose the best set of genes for her potential offspring. Secondly, the very circumstances of rape eliminate the chance that a father will help raise the offspring caused by that rape, because a man who rapes a woman is probably not going to stick around to help raise the child caused by it. So it decreases the potential of parental investment. Finally, it can cause problems within a current or a future relationship. So if a woman is in a relationship at the moment and she's raped by someone else, there's a high likelihood that she might be abandoned by her current partner. Or even if she's not in a relationship, she runs the risk of potentially not finding future mates because of the stigma associated with rape in our culture. So, in response to these problems, there are two main questions that one might think of in terms of what women might do to reduce the risk of pregnancy caused by rape. The first question is, do women engage in behaviors that reduce the likelihood of rape during the ovulatory phase of their menstrual cycle? So when they're most fertile, do they do things that'll help them avoid getting raped? There have been many studies that show that women are less likely to engage in risky behavior when they're ovulating, even though they're doing more things overall. So, for example, they'll walk less in dark alleyways, they'll walk less by themselves at night, things like that show that they're avoiding the risk of rape. The second question that could come up are women in the ovulatory phase, when the risk of conception is greatest, better able to resist, fend off, or deter instances of sexual assault? And this is what my study really focuses on. The main question that the study sought to address was, does a woman's capacity to resist sexual assault vary across the menstrual cycle? And this study did that using the following method. First, before the testing, women were given, were asked to take a hand grip dynameter reading. I'll explain more about each of these methods after I present the overall way that the methods were done. So before the test, women were given a pre-test hand grip dynameter reading, after which they read a sexual assault scenario or they read a control passage. Both of the passages involved walking towards a car and a scenario revolving around that. After reading the scenario, they took a second hand grip dynameter reading, and finally they were given a test which gauged their ovulatory, whether they were ovulating or not, basically, which phase of the menstrual cycle they were in. I'll explain more about each of these phases now. So a hand grip dynameter is basically a measure of hand strength, and the way it works is that, as you can see, the woman holds the gadget in her hand and squeezes as hard as she can. And the dial that you can see up there on the top will move to see how many kilograms of weight she could potentially hold with her hand. And this is thought of as a measure of general strength. So again, she did this before the test and then after reading the passage. Next, the woman either read a sexual assault related passage or a control passage. Here I've included an example of one of the paragraphs from that passage. So it says, "At the end of a vacant lot, she pauses and looks for her car. It is parked between two of the few remaining vehicles, a beat-up old pickup truck, and one of those family vans. Happy with the sight of her car, she reaches into her coat pocket for her keys, and finds that they are not there. They must be in her purse, and as she begins to feel around for them in her large bag, she notices that strange man again. This time, he appears to be headed directly towards her. At her car, she places her handbag on the hood and peers into it, but in the darkness, nothing is visible. She now feels his eyes upon her and frantically searches for her keys. Finally, her fingers make contact with her keys and she pulls them out of her purse. As she inserts the key into her car door, she feels his cold hand on her shoulder. In the actual study, they were read the passage while they also read it themselves, so as was just done here. Second, the control passage was this is one of the paragraphs from the control passage. At the edge of the full parking lot, she pauses and looks for her car. Usually, it would bother her to have to search for her vehicle, but on this splendid day, she is happy to wander aimlessly through the sea of automobiles looking for her own. After a while, she spots her car and reaches in her pocket for her keys. As she opens her car door, she feels a blast of heat coming from the interior. She immediately rolls down the window and slides back the sunroof. She starts her car, adjusts the stereo, and as she pulls out of the parking lot, those nearby can hear her music blasting. So as you can see, both of them have to do with looking for a car and looking for keys, but they're clearly very different feels to both passages. So after doing the testing, women were then asked when the beginning of their last period was, and they used the forward cycling method to estimate when their next ovulation would be. So as we learned in this class, that's about 14 days after the onset of your menses. And what they also did was they also asked women to provide a urine sample, and so that they could measure the amount of LH in their urine, because again, as we learned, there's an LH surge during ovulation. And they only included women in the study what they said about their menses correlated with what showed up in the test results. So the results of this study were incredibly significant. So as you can see here, the black is for women who took the hand grip reading after reading the sexual assault passage, and gray was for women in the control context. And what it measured was the total hand grip difference, so the difference between that pre-test hand grip diameter reading and the post-test hand grip diameter reading. And as you can see, only ovulating women who read the sexual assault passage had a higher reading afterwards. So for most of the women, except for these ovulating women who read the sexual assault passage, their hand grip diameter readings decreased after reading. Whereas for women who read this passage, they were kind of more in a state of general arousal and better able to show strength after reading this passage. So in a way, you can kind of think in your mind or assume, and I think this is what the researchers assumed, is this shows that they were kind of much more ready for like fight or flight. And you can see that it had a p-value of less than 0.001, which is highly significant. So before I kind of summarize what the main conclusion and the main takeaway point of this study was, it might be important to first take a few things into account. So first of all, the study had many more ovulating than menstruating women. And there have been many studies that have shown that ovulating women in general are much more likely to volunteer for studies. And it might be because there was that urine test involved, menstruating women might have been more stigmatized in terms of wanting to submit a urine sample. And so they might not have wanted to be included. Secondly, there's been a little bit of debate in terms of the accuracy of LH test results because it provides a window of time and doesn't provide a specific time, an exact time for when a woman is ovulating. And thirdly, it's slightly unclear about whether these results are specific to sexual assault. So it might just be any general assault scenario or any general scary passage might have created this sort of arousal response in women instead of just simply a sexual assault scenario. However, the fact that, if you remember in that graph, the fact that it was specific to sexual assault and the control passage did nothing, the authors claim that that's a reason enough to believe that this might be specific to sexual assault. So in conclusion, the authors of this study concluded that women may have been selected to behave in ways that reduce the likelihood of conception as a consequence of rape, and in this case that might be related to their general strength after being in a scenario related to sexual assault. Thank you.